Most actors, when exposed to fame, notoriety, and internet clout, tend to undoubtedly praise the roles that got them to be where they are now. Penn Badgley, however, expresses the uncomfortable truth of the characters he's played being loved by audiences. Despite being loved for playing sociopathic stalkers, Penn has time and time again shown discomfort towards these opinions that tend to disregard the very real evil that is portrayed within these characters. In a 2018 interview, he's asked whether or not he sees the hype many people see within his character online, and his response is quite literally the opposite of what most fans of the show tend to say.
I disagree with Joe possibly more than anyone. Like, I really, and I disagree that it's a love story. I don't see it the same way as anyone else, I think, because of the things I had to do to play Joe.
In another video uploaded around the time You Season 2 was airing, Penn Badgley expresses his view on all the positive attention Joe Goldberg had been getting, and described that it indicates a disturbing aspect of today's society and the whole idea of romanticizing horrible people.
Well, I think the logline when it was on Lifetime was, "How far are you willing to go for love?" But I was always like, no, that's not.
Ooh.
That's not what that is. To me, it's like, how far are we willing to go to forgive an evil white man?
Although there are some individuals who are confused at the concept of him not liking the characters he plays even in the slightest, when even audiences see the good within them, once you learn about his treatment early on in the Hollywood industry and how he's essentially been forced to play a certain archetype, you'll realize Penn Badgley never feared obscurity, he feared exactly the kind of attention he ended up with. Penn Badgley was born on November 1st, 1986. His father, Duff Badgley, had worked as a news reporter and was also involved in politics, being the Green Party candidate for governor of Washington State in 2008. His mother, Lynn, worked numerous jobs, but would later create a business in jewelry design and involve herself as a producer for different movies. Being an only child, Penn's parents greatly supported his love for acting and saw great potential in him eventually becoming a star. Unfortunately, his parents would divorce when Penn was only 12 years old, which actually led him to explore early instances of his artistic side. However, this is when Penn began to kind of hate himself and unfortunately his body. "I know that I hated my body and simply wanted a different one." He had put on weight, overeating as a response, he thinks, to his parents' divorce and social isolation, but idolized the men he watched in films, feeling that he should look like them, although that just seemed like an impossibility. To distract himself from everything happening with his parents, he wanted to start involving himself in the Los Angeles scene that, at the time, was where you needed to be if you wanted to make it as an artist. Badgley and his mother both moved from Maryland to LA in order to really pursue his endeavors to become a star. Like most child actors, they are often berated with tons of managers trying to invest in them early on since they see potential. Penn was no short of that, being pushed to try and become a pop star type singer where he was given songs discussing things like romance and love at such a young age. One interviewer asked him whether or not it felt creepy talking about things that kids usually don't talk about, and he responded by saying, "A 12-year-old boy singing about the beautiful night we spent together? Yes, I didn't know what the hell it was about. It was misguided." However, unlike child actors not having the best experience in Hollywood, something most people don't know about Penn Badgley is that he never went to high school, and in fact skipped it entirely, later enrolling himself into college without it. At age 14, Badgley was trying to ensure that most of his time would be allocated to acting, since at this point, he had been involving himself in local theater groups and getting roles here and there. In order to do so, he took a proficiency exam, an assessment designed to measure an individual's competency, skill level, or knowledge in a specific area, most commonly used for language or professional skills. This led him to attend Santa Monica College early on and was later accepted to the University of Southern California, however turning it down due to him having filming schedule conflicts that forced him to be present in the acting world. Although some actors arrive in Los Angeles expecting a clean, fast-tracked rise into movie stardom, Penn Badgley's early career unfolded in a much quieter, less glamorous way. After relocating to California at a young age to pursue acting, Badgley spent his earliest years doing whatever work he could get, including voiceovers for children's radio and even early video game performances, lending his voice to titles like Mario Golf 64 and Mario Tennis.
Congratulations! Oh, yeah, all right! Yeah!
Rather than being positioned as a breakout star, his introduction to the industry was fragmented and unassuming, built on small appearances and background roles that barely registered beyond casting rooms. His first on-screen work followed a similar pattern. Badgley appeared briefly in episodic television, including Will and Grace, before landing a more memorable role on What I Like About You, where you can see early instances of the charm he can bring to characters that on the surface feel dull.
Look, Holly, here's the thing. If those guys knew I liked you and then got shot down by you, it would blow my reputation. As a stone-cold player.
While the role earned him some attention, it didn't launch him into overnight recognition. Instead, it became another step in a steadily accumulating resume. He would go on to headline short-lived WB series like Do-Over, The Mountain, and The Bedford Diaries, projects that placed him consistently on television without ever fully breaking through. Even his first major film appearance in John Tucker Must Die positioned him on the edges of a teen phenomenon rather than at its center. It wasn't until a role he initially turned down, one that would redefine both his career and public image, that Penn Badgley finally collided with mainstream attention as Dan Humphrey on Gossip Girl. Badgley's understated performances across television eventually caught the attention of casting directors at the CW, who were struggling to find the right actor to anchor a new teen drama titled Gossip Girl. After initially passing on the role, Penn later auditioned and was offered the part of Dan Humphrey, an outsider navigating Manhattan's elite Upper East Side. Although at the time it may have not seemed like a role destined to define his career, the series would go on to become one of the most culturally dominant television shows of the late 2000s, firmly cementing Dan Humphrey as Penn Badgley's most recognizable character long before Joe Goldberg ever entered the picture. Although he never ended up winning any awards, he was nominated for a 2001 Young Artist Award for Best Performance in a Daytime Series for his work, which would further solidify his place at the center of a phenomenon that would completely reshape both his career and the kind of fame that followed him from that point forward. After Gossip Girl made Badgley a recognizable face in pop culture, it might have seemed like Dan Humphrey was the role he'd be best known for well into the future, but his career would pivot again when he was approached for the dark thriller You. Badgley was initially hesitant about playing Joe Goldberg, telling Entertainment Weekly that, "I didn't want to do it. It was too much. I was conflicted with the nature of the role. If this is a love story, what is it saying? It's not an average show, it's a social experiment," before ultimately being convinced by the depth of the script and discussions with creators Greg Berlanti and Sarah Gamble. He later explained that what drew him in was not the sensationalism but the conceptual complexity, saying that understanding Joe's humanity was key to his decision, specifically stating, "I knew that I would be conflicted about the role from day one till the last day," a tension the creators felt made him perfect for it. What followed was a performance that stood in stark contrast to his earlier work, making it one of Netflix's most controversial hits and redefining his public image. His portrayal of Joe, while awkward and unsettling, became a phenomenon in its own right, and would set the stage for the media firestorm around how audiences related to the character in ways neither he nor the show writers could have ever predicted. Now, when it came to preparing for the role, you'd be surprised by the fact that Penn Badgley actually didn't need to do much of anything. Instead, it was almost like he was born to play the role.
You, as this character, have this neat trick of going from charming to very creepy. Is there a trick? Is there a trick for making that turn from charming to creepy? Gotcha.
I arrive on the mark, I do nothing but look up, and the entire crew behind the camera goes, "Oh, whoa, man, that is phenomenal. That is so creepy." And I did nothing.
Despite having a stellar performance from 2018 to 2025, Penn never once actually won an award, but was instead nominated for numerous. It's unfortunate not to see, but then again, even some of the best actors in shows sometimes don't win at these events. And this was greatly felt by much of the audiences, with comments stating, "I think the Emmys can be very nitpicky with what they choose, to be honest. For example, I always thought Andrew Lincoln, who plays Rick Grimes on The Walking Dead, should have at least one Emmy by now." He is an amazing actor too, most likely because it is on AMC, though they wouldn't consider it. However, despite his sensational run as Joe Goldberg on You, Penn Badgley would begin to involve himself in a very real controversial conflict that was beginning to blow up in 2024. In case some of you don't know, in Drake Bell's 2024 documentary Quiet on Set: The Dark Side of Kids TV, the actor who once starred on Drake and Josh revealed that while he was working on Nickelodeon shows in the early 2000s, he was harmed by a dialogue coach named Brian Peck, who later faced criminal charges for his conduct. Peck was arrested in 2003, pleaded no contest to 2 accounts related to misconduct with a minor, served time in prison, and was required to register as an offender. Bell has since spoken publicly about the impact the situation had on him and the culture behind the scenes during that period of his early career. Now, where Penn and his mother come into the picture is actually pretty odd and kind of confusing. To be clear, Penn Badgley's name kind of gets dragged into this situation due to him being tied to his mother, but basically it was revealed that Lynn, his mother, wrote that Peck was one of the few people I have always trusted with her son. Penn, now 27, was 17 when this letter was submitted to the judge, who ultimately sentenced Peck to serve time in prison in 2004. Penn worked on the sitcom What I Like About You, which was created by Nickelodeon's Dan Schneider, and Peck was also credited as a background actor in 2 episodes of the show. Now, the reason why this is weird is because Brian Peck, essentially the villain of the Nickelodeon television network, was receiving letters of support from Penn Badgley's mother. Now, I'm not going to say who's right or who's wrong, but I'll leave it up to you to form your own opinion on this situation. Now, with this, you'd think this is all the possible drama that involves Penn, but there's actually more that ties directly to the show You. Despite looking quite similar, during the shooting of seasons 2 and 3, there was a rumor going around that Penn Badgley's wife was jealous of Love Quinn's actor Victoria. One Redditor explained, the rumor started because Penn announced to not do much scenes anymore to show his wife respect. And then when Love was gone, he didn't follow through. With Kate, it was no problem at all. Now, is some of this most likely blown out of proportion? Probably, but it still remains odd that after filming season 3, Love Quinn never returns in flashbacks or anything, despite being so involved throughout multiple seasons of the show. Another Redditor provides the opposite side of what many think. In my opinion, it's weird for anyone to act like they know the truth because these are people we don't know and can't know the details of their private lives and marriage. Now, honestly, I think that comment perfectly sums up what we need to know about this subject. It's none of our business, and it doesn't really even matter. However, probably the most relevant divide between the You fan base is not about outside drama or speculation, it's the way the show ended. Although You had a binge-worthy sensation over 5 seasons, its final episode sparked a firestorm of mixed reactions, with many fans praising the closure and others criticizing the show for how it wrapped up Joe's story, and left the show on a note that felt more like a broad commentary than a satisfying character conclusion. Some comments of the finale describe an appreciation for Penn's performance, stating, "Say whatever you want about the finale, but Penn was acting the living shit out of this. Such an incredible performance." Whereas others feel similar but in a different way. That season was 100% a cautionary tale for women to stop romanticizing serial killers, no matter how charming they might be. It was just poorly done and very on the nose. Regardless of what one might think about the way the show ended, Joe Goldberg's story came to an end, and Penn Badgley's reputation for playing him will live on for probably the rest of his life. From Gossip Girl to You, a certain character type has followed him that he just can't quite seem to shake off. I mean, they are literally his most iconic roles despite all his other acting jobs. Now, after hearing all of this, you might think to yourself that this completely proves the opposite point, that Penn Badgley ultimately did fall into the exact kind of fame he spent years trying to avoid, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Badgley choosing to play Joe Goldberg across multiple seasons of You wasn't about chasing popularity, it was about confronting it. Unlike his early career where roles like Dan Humphrey defined how audiences saw him, Penn eventually gained a voice in how Joe was written, framed, and ultimately punished by the narrative. He actively involved himself in shaping the character's moral boundaries, pushing back against him being romanticized and insisting that Joe's actions be treated as what they were. Sure, he was undoubtedly paid well for the role, but it's difficult to argue that Penn continues acting for the sake of fame when he has consistently criticized the attention his character receives, literally rejecting the heart heartthrob label and using his platform to question the audience rather than indulge them. To this day, he remains selective, measured, and openly conflicted about the role that brought him global recognition, a clear sign that his motivation was never validation or celebrity. After all these years, Penn Badgley has stayed true to himself and to the integrity of storytelling, whether through music, television, or uncomfortable conversations about the characters we choose to celebrate. And while the way he carries himself may seem subtle or understated, he never allowed Hollywood to strip away his deeply rooted respect for the craft or his belief that art should challenge us even when it makes us uncomfortable.